Recording in progress. I know I laugh because my Zoom is our podcast Zoom. And so every meeting I schedule automatically records. I
Sure,
have to
yeah.
get on and be like, sorry, I'm turning it off. We're not podcasting. Come some folks. Hello. We're not quite at 2 Eastern, so we'll give people a couple minutes, let people get on. Another minute or two.
I'm going to shut this door just a little bit. Sure. Do you want to go in? Stay out?
Hi, Elizabeth.
Hello, Stacey. How are you?
Good. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Thank you.
Nice to see your smiling face.
Ah, thanks. Nice to be here. So
And
happy to.
everyone else, too.
Yeah, lovely to see everybody. We're just giving people another minute and then we'll get started. I have that too. A minute after. So we'll do welcome and prayer and get started here. So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm Elizabeth Powers. I'm the communication manager for the Congregation of St. Joseph, and I also produce the podcast Beyond the Habit for the congregation. So thank you so much for joining us. We're so glad to have you here to talk a little bit about podcasts and maybe answer some questions. And I thought I would start us out with this prayer. I found a prayer for podcasters, so I thought that might be a fun start for our meeting here today. So, a prayer for podcasters. Lord God, creator of all things, I thank you for the gift of our voice and the technology that allows it to travel far beyond this room. Bless my podcast and everyone who listens to it. Grant me the grace of clarity, truth, and charity as I speak. Let the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be pleasing. Guard my mind against vanity and anxiety over metrics, and focus my intentions on serving others and glorifying your name. So, welcome everybody. So, today we're going to talk about podcasts, and I have made a couple slides to share just to help get us started. I'm going to go ahead and share those with y'all now. 1 second here. Just to offer some questions, right? And I hope people have questions and that we can, talk about whatever questions you have. Start the slideshow. Um, so just a quick check-in. How many people already have podcasts? Nope. Two. Okay, so a couple. So a lot of you are looking to start, right? Which I thought might be the case here. So that's wonderful. So I wanted to offer just a few questions to get us sort of rolling. Things you might have when you're starting out, questions you might want to talk about. So I thought I'd start by sharing just some questions that might be worthwhile and see what people think, or if you all have questions you want to start with. So some of the questions I just listed here, why even start a podcast? What are we hoping to do here? Who's the team you might need to assemble if you decide to podcast? What equipment might you need? What kind of skills might you need outside help for if they're not already within your team? What format will work best for your audience, depending on what you're wanting to do? Coming up with a name, which was surprisingly difficult for us when we started Beyond the Habit. Also, do you want to do an audio podcast or a video podcast? And that's a big question. I think a lot of us who are in the podcast space are grappling with right now. And also, what hosting platform are you going to use? Which is, again, another important thing. And how do hosting platforms work? If that's something, if you're new to podcasting, that might be something you want to talk about or think about as well. And if you already have a podcast, do you have questions about prepping for new seasons, episode planning, expecting the unexpected, which is for sure a thing that happens a lot for us? The possibility of needing to change formats, difficulties with guests, which anyone who does an interview style podcast will tell you you're going to come across. Even when they're wonderful, things happen. And sometimes just having to shift your expectations. So I thought we could start with, what questions you all have. Does this raise anything for you? Are there things you want to talk about first? And kind of go from there. But I thought I'd share some questions people might have just to get the ball rolling, get people thinking about things. Yeah, Amanda, please.
Yeah, hi. So I love podcasts. We do not have a podcast, and it's something I've thought about, but I've never seriously put any work into trying to
Sure.
produce one. But my first question is, do you have tips for pitching this to leadership? Like how to convince them this is a good idea, a good way to allocate our time and our resources, because we don't have a big team. So just curious if you have any
Absolutely.
tips for that.
That's a great question. So I'll tell you, when we first decided we were going to do this, we had a meeting with two members of leadership. And we really brought to them what the statistics were about who podcasts are reaching and who we wanted to reach with what we were going to do. Our podcast really focuses to a younger audience. We say young adult, so 20 to 45. Um,
Mhm.
Catholic or Catholic adjacent is how we talk about our audience. So we brought them that the percentages of people listening to podcasts in that demographic. And I don't have the stats for you, but I could get them that religious podcasts have grown exponentially over the last couple of years. Spiritual podcasts have really grown. So we sort of compiled a lot of that data to bring to them to sort of help convince them that this was a good idea. We also had a couple of younger sisters, one of whom ended up being one of our hosts, join us in that meeting, and also some other younger adults who had connections to the congregation to talk about what they'd want to hear from us and why they thought that might be a good idea. So our leadership team really likes stats, so we came in with a lot of stats and then some real life people to say this is people who are going to listen. Another thing we did sort of as we continued, once they're like, okay, we're interested, but we want to know more, is we found podcasts that were similar to what we wanted to do and shared some episodes to sort of show what it could be because it was really hard. Most of our leadership don't listen to podcasts. And so they didn't have a sense, you know? So we're like, this is sort of what we're talking about doing. Like, this isn't exactly what we're going to do, but like, please listen. Let's listen to some of this together and you can get a sense of what this actually means because sometimes that was really complicated for them to sort of grasp what we were talking about. Other people have any other suggestions? That's sort of where we started. But if other people have suggestions, yeah, please kind of.
Hi, yeah, this is a story that's specific to us starting the podcast. But Amanda, if you want to use this, you're welcome to. The whole idea came about for us for a podcast from our donors. So I do mission advancement as well as communications for the Holy Union Sisters, and so I talk to the donors on a regular basis. And one person, one alum of the sisters, told me this little story, and I'm sure most of you have heard something very much like this. And what they said was, I wish there was some way I could go back. I learned so much from the sisters as a kid, but I was a kid, wasn't paying attention half the time in the classroom, and I'm sure a lot of what they try to teach me went right over my head.
Mhm.
And said, if only there was a way I could go back, I would listen with new ears. And that had a lovely poetry to it. And I thought, we've got all these sisters who are, they're not really retired, but you're getting advanced in years. There's not as many things as you can do in terms of ministry, but boy, you can sit around a table with other sisters and talk about a topic that's meaningful or important to you, or a cause, or something, it's some social justice issue, or have a conversation and share that with people. And the things that you as sisters have learned in the years since you've been in a classroom are enormous, and you now have that to share as well with people. And so I shared that at the next assembly we had, and everybody immediately got it. Everybody went, "That's a good idea. I like that." And we started attracting listeners right away. We're now in our fifth year. We've got over 6,000 people who listen regularly, and it's been a wonderful addition to what we do. But listening with new ears really caught my ear, and so a podcast lets them do that.
That's really wonderful.
Thank you. Those are great tips from both of you.
Anybody else tips you want to share? Okay, great. Good start. Other questions we want to touch on, or I could just talk, but I just figured I'd see what people want to know. Are there other questions people have? Yes, please, Patty.
Hi, thanks so much. I really appreciate this conversation. I have a ton of questions, but I'll try to kind of keep it focused. So, the congregation I work for actually had a podcast. It started as a pet project of someone that was interested. I think the young woman, her aunt was a nun in the congregation, so she started it. So it's kind of been just laying fallow. So I guess I'm really just exploring this idea, and I think my main concern is consistency, right? So if we're to start something, I think kind of knowing what I want to do or accomplish and staying consistent. And I just wanted to kind of throw out, I guess, the idea of if I had something in the past with a title and a format, um, would it be appropriate to resurrect that or kind of start from scratch? And I'm just, I guess, and
Sorry. Sorry.
it's a very general question. I don't even know if it's possible to find an answer. And I think that then what I'm struggling with is, do I do just audio or video? But I think that's like, I have this nice content and it's kind of like, what do I do with that? Or how do I move that ball forward and then stay consistent with it?
Sure. So I think the question of re-erecting versus new, right? Part of that's going to determine on what if you're wanting to do the same kind of content that was happening before. If you're wanting to do the same kind of content, then it might be worth to resurrect because you might have an audience that was following that podcast who might rejoin. But if you're thinking this would be a totally different or new situation, I think then I'd want to maybe start new. Um, that's my personal advice. I don't know if other people have thoughts on that, but that would be my instinct. I'll tell you, when we started Beyond the Habit, we ended up using the same name as our blog, which we no longer use. But I do think using that same name for us helped because people were already used to getting blog posts from us that way. And so that was one of the reasons we ended up with that name. Um, so, so I think it depends on if you're using the same kind of content, you might want to consider that, but if not, I would start fresh. And then the video versus audio question is a really good one. Um, and I'll tell you, it's something that we have talked about a lot at Beyond the Habit. Right now, we are all audio. We started as audio, we've continued as audio, but we're constantly circling this, do we start needing to be a video platform? And it's something we continue to do. And I actually have a couple of links, if you don't mind, Julie, putting those in, of some recent conversations I've seen that might be helpful to people if you're trying to decide audio and video. Um, and I think it's one of those things. And I'll tell you, for us, we're staying audio for now for a variety of reasons. If you're starting fresh, you might have a different feeling. But we don't want to switch just because a lot of people are asking, and by a lot of people, I mean internally, not our audience, if we should switch. We want to make sure if we do that switch, it's thoughtful and makes sense for our audience. We're actually looking at doing next spring will be our 10th season. So I think we're actually going to do a couple like special video episodes and see how they go. But for us, it's really a matter of what's working for our audience. Um, and also because of how we personally produce the podcast, audio is easier. Um, we produce it all over Zoom. We interview guests. Um, the sisters think it's super boring to watch them talk to these guests on video from their bedrooms or wherever they, their office, wherever they happen to be. But also, to be honest, for me, the way we do things now, a transition would be a harder edit. But again, I think that depends on what your content is and what you're looking to share. I would imagine, Kenneth, if you have sisters sitting around a table talking to each other, that would maybe lend itself to video in a different way than my sisters who are in Boston and Detroit and then talking to someone from anywhere, makes it a little harder. So, and other answers to that, and other thoughts, yes, Kenneth.
I would just say we actually are entirely audio as well because we have a mix. Sometimes we have sisters if they're located in the same location, we'll have them sitting around the table talking. If they're on Zoom, we do it via Zoom. If they're further away, we do it via Zoom. But I think I would just have a really hard time convincing any sisters to participate in an audio podcast. It is hard enough to get them to participate in a video, some of them. I mean, excuse me, I would have a hard time getting them to participate in a video podcast. It was hard enough to get some of them to participate in an audio one. Generally speaking, people don't like to have a camera on them. They're very uncomfortable. There's a handful of people that are an exception to that, but I think it's a much lower bar to get over to do an audio one, especially to start. And so unless you've got some real, jazz handsy kinds of sisters who are more than happy to get in front of a camera and perform, and those are rare people, but they're wonderful people. If you've got some folks like that, then audio and video together would be lovely. But I just think, especially just to get off the ground, we found that audio was quite easy to get going.
Thanks, Kenneth. Any other thoughts for Patty on her question? I hope that's helpful, Patty. Yeah, thank you. What other questions do people have? Other things? Yes, please, Brian.
Yeah, my question's pretty straightforward. It's regarding how folks determined what type of format was best for them, whether it's an interview style or more StoryCorps. Folks are familiar with that podcast style. What were the things that you considered when you were deciding what kind of format was best
Yeah,
for you?
that's a great question, Brian. And I can start and tell you that for us, it was a matter of thinking about the audience we wanted to reach and the sisters we had available to do this was where we sort of started. We knew we wanted to reach a younger adult audience. That was sort of our goal. And we knew we had at least one, she hates when I call her younger sister, but we all understand what that means in this case. We had a sister who was interested and willing. And then we ended up, our podcast actually is a CSJ and an SSJ do it. Our two sisters are one is from our congregation and one is from the Philly sisters. So we had people who were willing to sort of go all in as well. We had some young sisters who were willing to say, we want to interview people and talk about these sort of bigger issues happening around social justice or around church or around spirituality. So we had the players who were willing to do that, and we thought that would be good for our audience. They were more interested sort of in those issues of social justice and things like that. So for us, that's sort of how we ended up where we are. But I'll tell you, the first season, we tried a couple different things. We always knew we wanted to do interview style, but we also knew people were really interested in the sisters' lives. So we did kind of a half and half situation, which is what we do now, where we start with like 5 minutes of banter where the sisters just talk about something. Sometimes it's related to the episode. We record the banter after we've talked to our interview. So sometimes we're like, we have to explain X, Y, or Z before this interview. So they'll talk about that. But people's favorite are where they talk about like, what do sisters wear? Or this weird thing. I remember Sister Erin having this conversation about she goes to a gym and her instructor didn't know she was a sister and found out and freaked out about the music having swear words that he was using. Like sometimes it's fun stories, sometimes it's like we have to massage into this interview. So for us, we wanted to share a little bit of the sisters interview. And originally we tried to do sort of an unpacking at the end. We have stopped that because it wasn't working for us. So also we were willing to be flexible, even though we had an idea of format. When that wasn't working, we kind of just made some changes, you know.
Elizabeth, what do you mean by it wasn't working for you?
So we thought when we originated with the concept, so those of you who are CS and SSJs know we have sharing the state of the heart, right? That's our style of prayer where we talk about things. We thought we'd do some like sharing about how the sisters felt after the interview, and we just found them not to be super engaging, or the sisters didn't have a lot to say. And so after we recorded one or two that way, I don't think we even did the whole first season this way. I'm trying to remember. It's been a while now. We said, we don't need that part. It's not working for us. We also do a fun, we call it our lightning round with our guests at the end, and we found that a better ending place. Fun questions, high energy, and now we're done. Instead of trying to bring it back to like more of a spiritual place, for us, that just wasn't working. So those high energy, fun questions just worked as an ending to the podcast.
That's what I would
Yeah.
perceive. It seems like I'm afraid that banter at the beginning would actually deter people from listening because they don't know what they're listening to.
That hasn't been our experience. And I can think of some other podcasts who do similar things. If you've ever listened to Jesuitical, they do a similar thing. And we found when we were sort of testing, we did some test interviews and stuff, see how it goes before we went live. And we found if we jumped right in, it didn't feel like enough because people really want to know who the sisters are too. It's great that we're interviewing these awesome guests, but they're also interested in the sisters and who they are as
So
people.
kind of introducing who this sister is and what her background is, maybe with her. Like,
So we interview a lot of different people. We don't just interview. So I have two sister interviewees, and then we interview, like we had James Martin on this year. We interview all kinds of different people. So we start with the sisters are our hosts. People know them as our host. In our first season, we did an episode called Who Are These People, which is still one of people's favorites, where the sisters explain who they are and why we're doing this. And then at the beginning of every episode, they're just like, hey, we're back. Here's what's going on in our life. We have a great episode for you today. Here's who we're going to talk about or talk to and what we're talking about. And then we go into an interview. So that's why that one works for us. That might not be the style for you, but that's how we ended up here. We listened to other podcasts to see what sort of format sounded like they would provide what we wanted. So that's how we got there.
Elizabeth, what was the process like internally? Was there a pretty good diversity of ideas that came to the table that had to be negotiated, or?
Yeah, it was I will tell you our leadership team didn't love what the initial idea of when I mentioned Jesuitical because it was one of the ones we used to as an example, and one of our leadership team members said they're laughing an awful lot. I'm like, yeah, there has to be some fun. This is not like NewsHour that we're doing here. Do you know what I mean? And so on that particular Zoom call we had with leadership, and I had some sisters and I had some other younger people there. They really were great, and they were like, "No, no, this is what a podcast needs to be. For us, for what we're talking about, there needs to be some levity too. We're going to talk about important issues, but we need some levity." And so there was some what the leadership thought, what the sisters thought, where I was coming in, and we had to sort of play around with that. I'll tell you, for us, it took a while before we were working on this for well over a year before we went live. And that's not everyone's experience, but that happened to be ours.
Yeah.
And we have a lot of moving parts because we interview outside people, and that also takes more work.
Yeah, it's interesting that you had as much education that you had to give to some of these folks, maybe sisters. And that. Thanks for that.
Yeah, of course. Of course. Yeah.
The other thing, Brian, you may not want to necessarily tie yourself entirely to one format. We are primarily sort of a conversational format, so it's not an interview generally. It's several sisters up to four sitting around discussing a particular topic or a particular experience or something. But we also have sort of a sub-series. It's the same podcast, but we had a group of episodes called My Story, where a particular sister would just talk. It was a monologue virtually the entire episode, talking about her entry into religious life and what it was like for her and the various things she'd been involved in. And, so sisters who had particularly interesting lives as a woman religious would volunteer to get on and just tell their story. And so that wouldn't fall under the conversational heading. And then in addition to that, we had a couple of sisters, one in particular that we did as just strictly flat out an interview. She spent 40 years as the chaplain at Rikers Island in New York, ministering to inmates, and had just this extraordinary story. And so we felt like let's build up a body of questions to ask her to really allow her to help share her experiences that. So you may not want to necessarily tie yourself entirely to one format, but rather allow for a little flexibility, an episode here or there, be more like this or more like that. We have found that to be very helpful.
Kenneth, are you still running all those different types of formats, or have you just started to hone in on one?
No, but what we have done is we've started to shift our focus. So for the first 4 years, we're in our fifth year now. The first 4 years, we did things like talking about ministries, talking about social justice issues, talking about individual sisters' vocation. And now we're beginning to focus really on spiritual issues. So topics that are geared towards drawing yourself closer to God, finding meaning in your life, things like that. So in the fifth year, we're really shifting not the format of it, but the focus of the discussions into more spiritual discussions.
That's a really great point, Kenneth. And I should mention, I think that's part of the joy of podcasting is you can kind of do what you want. Like we have a general format, but once a season we do something that's not an interview. This season we did a book recs from the sisters. What are the sisters reading? And the two of them just were like, "Here's what I'm reading this summer," and people loved it. It was our biggest episode of the season because people loved it. So that's a good point, Kenneth. The joy is you can do what you want. So I see we have a question in the messages, and then I'll come to you after, Connie. But Rob wants to know, is there a sweet spot for frequency of episode? And that's a great question, Rob. And I think so much of that has to do with your own, how much time you have to devote. A lot of podcasts do, I mean, I've seen podcasts do once a week, once a month. It really depends. We tried to do once a week our first season, and it was quite frankly a nightmare for me. And we found out that we couldn't promote each episode as much as we wanted to because by the time we promoted this episode, the new episode was out and it just moved too fast. So we do every other week. For us, that's really worked. But I do think part of it is what kind of team you have available. Anybody else have thoughts or Kenneth, I don't know if you do or anybody else on sweet spot for how often?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think ideally you'd love to have a podcast episode a week, but we just didn't have, the professional podcasts that are out there. They've got a team of people, and that's their only job, and that's what they do. And so, but like most of us, we're wearing a whole bunch of different hats. I know I am, and so one a month works for us. And also the sisters, you don't want to put the sisters under a lot of pressure to come up with something and perform, every week. And, it's tough enough to get a group of sisters together to sit and chat once a month because they want to do a little preparation work and they don't just want to sit down in front of a microphone and, stumble around. They want to have some time to talk about, well, what are we going to talk about and how should the conversation flow and things like that. So for us, once a month is what we've been doing. And that's doable for us anyways, but everyone is different. You may have 3 or 4 people dedicated to a podcast. I don't know. If you do, then that might be a different answer for you.
Great point. And also we kind of make our own schedule. We're on every other week, but we do it in cycles. So we do a fall, and then a winter, spring. So we'll start back up. We're on summer break. We'll start back up probably end of August and go till the beginning of December because we found people aren't listening in December anyway because they're all busy. And then we come back like normally February and go through the beginning of June. Um, 10 to 13 episodes in each of those cycles. That's what ended up working for us. And it was a trial by fire a little bit. Like I said, our first season was every week, and I was like, oh, we're done. It's been 8 weeks, and wow, that went fast. Was this enough? So really depends on the person, I think. Any other thoughts on that for people? All right, Connie, yeah, what do you got?
I guess I have 3 questions. You said that you mostly do it by Zoom. How's the quality of sound doing that by Zoom? And do you need to clean it up? Are you putting it in something?
That's a great question. So I learned a lot, a lot about sound, but probably not as much as I could learn when we started this. We record in mono on Zoom, which we found makes a difference, and that's in your Zoom. Like when you go back to the back end, you can find that. We also record the whole conversation, and then individually, you can record the individual people. And that makes a difference in editing because if someone starts talking over somebody else, you can just write that whole part out with the other person talking. So there are those kinds of sort of little twists you can find. We found that Zoom has worked fine. We were worried about it. Um, and we've tried different things. We joke in one of our episodes because the first time the sisters both were in a closet because they're like, we want more padding. So they were like in a closet with clothes surrounding them, trying to pad themselves for good audio. You don't have to do that. We do have better mics now than we had at first, which has made a difference, but we didn't want to buy the equipment until we knew what we needed. And I
Yes.
think our mics were like $100. Yeah, like we did not buy like super expensive equipment to do this.
Right, like a Yeti or something. Right.
Yeah, exactly. And they both have, I think they have the same one, but yeah, they were not super expensive. I will tell you, we are lucky in that we have a budget. And so I use a sound editor. After I do everything, she like gives it a listen for us. You know what I mean? I like put stuff together. I'll be honest, it's not nearly as expensive as I thought it might be. And she's wonderful and I appreciate her because this is not, I was never a podcaster before this, it was just like, here, you're going to do this now. Um, but I think I could probably do it if I had to all on my own, but it's nice to have her as support. So,
So my other part would be how scripted are you and how much editing?
great question. We are not scripted, at all. So that's fun. We say that we wanted to feel conversational with the guest. There have been a couple guests who said, could you give me an idea of questions that you're going to ask? And we said, of course, knowing that this might lead to some other questions. But yes, here's like a basic outline of what we're going to talk about. So yeah, we're really not scripted. We do a fair amount of editing. We also, as I mentioned, record with the guest before we record our intro banter because we want to see what they say and what we might need to say. Um, Not even only because of what they're talking about, but sometimes it's a matter of, oh, this was really heavy. We talked about really heavy stuff, and we want a little lightener to start with, or something. So, I probably listen to the episodes at least 3 times each with edits. I transcribe all of our Zoom calls and then I edit from there
Right,
first,
right in the transcription. Okay.
right
So
in
you
the
can get rid of
transcription where
all
I
the
say, okay,
ums and
here's
the,
what we're keeping, here's what we're not.
right.
And that also comes with time. Like I always tell people, don't listen to our first episodes, please. If you want to hear some good editing. We also started with Helen Prejean, who is, if you've ever, I love her so much, but she's a freight train, right? She just was gonna talk a long time, and I didn't want to cut her because she's so amazing. And I've gotten better. I'm a editor, like a writing editor by trade, so that's sort of how I edit my podcast. Um, but yeah, it's probably several rounds through because we also add music. We got a composer to do some music for us, and we add some music to layer some sound in to our podcast, and that's normally our last step is to put music in. So
Thank you.
it's time consuming, but the more you do it, the better you get. Like I don't spend nearly the time now that I used to have to spend when we started. So other answers to that question? Yeah, kind of.
Hmm. I would, on the question of scripted or non-scripted, I would strongly advise to stay away from scripted. We had a couple of sisters who weren't real comfortable talking off the cuff and wanted to have everything scripted. And you can just tell when somebody's reading something. And I've listened to some podcasts that are very scripted, and I just can't listen to that for more than 30 seconds. It just the written word is very different than the spoken word, and it comes across like listening to somebody read a book or something, and it's not what people listen to podcasts for. What we've started doing is calling them talking points. And so when we get together to do a preparation call for an episode, is we just take down some notes, things we want to make sure we mention, and some bullet points or something like that. You keep them at your elbow so that when you actually have the conversation, you don't forget to cover something you would hope to remember to cover. But it just we found, and we've had a couple of sisters say, look, I really want to introduce this topic in a very precise way. And so I want to read a script, I want to write it down, and they have. Kind of the results vary all over the board when you try to do something like that, but generally speaking, unscripted, I think is you're wise to do that. As far as editing software goes, I think there's a lot of free editing software out there. I use something called Audacity, which I think is quite good, and allows you to do a lot of cleanup work. And like Elizabeth said, with Zoom, often it gives you a separate audio track for every participant on the Zoom call, and so you can edit them all individually, and you can make a very professional, very clean sounding episode with something like that. Excuse me. It also allows you to raise the volume of specific individuals if they're speaking too quietly and everyone else is loud. You can kind of adjust for things like things like that as well. So,
Thank you. That's great.
Anybody else on that one? Stacy, I see you had one in the chat, but I see you also raised your
It's
hand. So
the
I'll come over to
it's
you.
the same
Thank God.
one.
All right.
Who are
Who's
your
the-
audience? What tip you had mentioned 20 to 40-year-olds. Well, are those people that you're thinking are going to be interested in vocation? Or I'm curious, both Ken and you, perhaps.
Sure. So for us, when we started the podcast, we really just wanted to share our charism and share our social justice issues and our spirituality in this way with a younger audience. Because so much of our audience on social media, which is the other thing I do for one of the other things I do for the congregation, is an older audience. So we were seeing how can we reach people. We do say we think that it's sort of secondary job is vocations. Like our vocations director loves it because that is sometimes how people find us, right? Um, our podcast has its own social media platforms. We're on Instagram and Facebook as the podcast as well, which is helpful because I can kind of see the difference, right, of our audiences there. And the kind of questions people have or the kind of interactions we get are different. But we don't say its main purpose is vocations, but we certainly see it as a sort of a secondary vocation outreach tool for sure. And people are really fascinated by sisters. You've probably seen this summer a lot of habited sister podcasts getting a lot of take. Um, One of the other things we've gotten better at is my two sisters who do the podcast have gotten much better at social media themselves. And then we share some of that from the podcast, trying to reach again that younger audience. Um, those of you who do podcasts might also know podcast metrics are fuzzy at best, um, depending on where you are. We're kind of everywhere. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts, we're all over the place. Each one of those platforms gives you different metrics, like they don't all give you the same metrics. Um, Sometimes your hosting platform, which ours does, will sort of combine and say, here's our best assessment of your metrics based upon what all of these platforms are telling us. So can I say for sure that we're 100% reaching that audience? No, but I can tell by certain things that we likely are. I always joke that when I see if it'll show me what devices people are listening on, and I said the day everyone's listening on their like computer, I'm in trouble. Because then that's just our sisters listening, right? And not external people. Um, so it is a little fuzzy with metrics, but those are some of the ways we try to keep track. Anybody else on this before I move on to Jennifer's side of
Yeah,
the
just want to ask
Yeah.
Elizabeth, if you're audio only, what are you putting on Instagram?
So we promote the podcast on Instagram. We promote on Facebook, on Instagram, typically 3 to 4 posts for each episode. Sort of here's a new episode post. Then we do I create videos with just the sound, but it's a little video with like a picture of the person using our branded sort of imaging. And then I normally do a quote as well for each episode. And then if we're lucky and we have a picture with one of the sisters with the person, then I also will use that as a post. I have a whole backlog of, oh, the sisters who've met all these people. Do I have a picture with the two of them together? Or is there something else going on that we can share? Or if the sisters are going to relevant things. So Sister Erin recently went to outreach and saw a lot of people we've interviewed before. And so we shared a lot of that on the podcast Instagram.
And
So
are you just using Canva for that?
Canva, or I mean, yeah, I use Canva quite a bit for the podcast, actually, more than I do for congregational work. Yeah,
Okay, thank you.
absolutely. Great question. Kenneth, yeah, go ahead before we Jennifer
Uh,
fill in.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
Is there anyone on who is using their podcast to reach younger people, and are you doing that effectively? Um, that's something that, as you said, Elizabeth, it's kind of sketchy. You don't really know who your audience is, who's actually listening. But I suspect our audience is probably a lot of people like me in their 60s, listening on their cell phones, driving home or something. Um, but has anyone got a podcast that's directed towards a younger demographic, and are you reaching them? And if so, how you doing that?
Anybody else have something they want to say before I jump in again? Think about it, but what I'll tell you, Kenneth, so that is our audience. And two things that have helped us, I think, but again, it depends on your budget. But for the last couple of years, we have started tabling. Specifically for us, we've been going to IFTJ because that's a high school college audience who are really connected to social justice. And so we have been going there and tabling there and talking to young adults and the people who come with them, who are often teachers, who are also younger. It's also a great place for us to get guests to interview. We've talked to a lot of people there, and they're like, "Oh yeah, sure, I'll do your podcast." It's also really incredible because you find out who's already listening. The first time we went, we had so many people come up to us and be like, I listen, or I listened to an episode, or I've seen you guys. And that was cool because you're like, okay, we are reaching these people that we want to be reaching. But again, it costs. But and right now we're just doing one a year because it is, it is a cost that we're incurring. But I found it to be really helpful, and we're continuing to do that. Um, we also use Spotify ads to try to make sure we're reaching that demographic. And Spotify is one of those things you can spend a lot or a little. We don't spend a whole lot, and they give you coupons a lot if you've never done it before, especially. Um, so so we do some of those every time a season comes out too, to try to make sure we're reaching an audience that's already listening to podcasts that aren't in our, demographics. Any other? Anybody else?
Has that New York Times article, don't call them nuns, they're podcasters.
Oh
Has
yeah.
that helped? Has that helped at all?
We haven't seen a huge uptick that we could say was from that specifically. I also think what's so tricky is so many of those nuns are habited, right? And it's such a different thing. Sister Erin, who's one of my co-hosts, did some funny videos kind of around it, which were kind of great. Like, she lives with an older sister who our like our young adults just love Sister Marcella. I don't know if you could see this. We just made new stickers for this year's ISTJ, and one of them says Sister Marcella, spiritual sage of the podcast. And so she's just with a little picture of her on it because they love her, because they love the older sisters and the habited sisters. So we try to find ways, right? Since we're not
Interesting.
habited,
Yeah,
in
that's
my
fun.
congregation, yeah, to you know hype up the sister thing.
Mhm.
Jennifer, yeah.
Well, you answered my question a little bit, but I'm just looking for greater distribution for our podcast. And
Sure.
we're doing all the usual channels. It's on our website, it's on social media, it's in our email newsletter. We're on Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon.
Yeah.
Just looking for unique ideas for reaching people we're not reaching yet.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It's so tricky, right? And I always say be everywhere you can. We host through Buzzsprout, but there are a bunch of different places you can host from. And I swear every time a new directory comes up, I'm like, yep, put us there. Put us in every directory you want to put us in. Like, put us out there. But I will say, yeah, Spotify ads have helped a lot. I don't, again, we have a decent budget, but I don't spend like huge money. But I try to do at least one every season to try to reach more people. And then, yeah, we've really found being out in the community has helped. Just in the last 2 years, Sister Erin and Sister Colleen have really upped their own social. Because I said to them, people know the podcast, but no one cares like what the no, that's not true. People care what congregants say, but what I can post and what you can post as a sister are different things. And so they've sort of been able to get out there as sort of, the host more. And that has really spread a lot and helped a lot. Sometimes with silly things, we were laughing. Erin was at Outreach and she did a like what I'm wearing today video. I forget what it's called. It has an acronym. And it got like 10, I want to say, I'm gonna get this wrong, but it was huge. It like took off and it was like, what's happening? I'm like, you're a sister and you're doing something fun and like in the zeitgeist and like people love it. Like right now that Netflix trend is going on TikTok where it's like, this would be me at the beginning of the Netflix documentary. Erin's working on something she's gonna post, like like that for the podcast. Part of it is having people who are willing for us, for a younger audience, to sort of be out in that sphere, doing those things to pull people in, where they could end up in algorithm. That's the other thing. And that was a long time. I mean, that took us a long time to get there. The sisters were not just like, oh, sure, I'll just start making social content outside of this for you. But we found it helps now that we're here. So yeah, Kenneth, please.
All
I
right,
don't know if you saw Jamie Hess, I think she's just a speaker, a public speaker, talking about why are we suddenly obsessed with nuns?
Mhm.
And her Instagram post is basically it's the sisterhood, the authenticity, the wisdom, which is interesting because you can really grab from that for your content.
Absolutely. Like I said, people love Marcella. It's so funny. She was so disgruntled about it when Erin started to be like, no, you have to be in these videos. But now she embraces it. Um, but it is,
How do
it's
you
true.
how do you address other sisters that think it's not somber enough or serious enough, or that they're going to be used in a funny way? Like I had sisters, when the Blue Jays were in the playoffs for baseball,
Hmm.
um, they're huge Blue Jay fans and are a huge radio station here wanted to interview them and they didn't want any part of it. because they didn't want it to turn into the nuns are praying for the baseball team. And
It can be a tricky line to walk for sure. Part of how we've gotten away with it, I will just tell you, is by making it sort of its own property. You know what I mean? The podcast has its own social medias. We share stuff to the congregation post, but we're a little more fun on our podcast socials. Um, the podcast has its own website. Like we have tried to keep it a little bit separate. Um, so that people understand this is like a different thing. This is a young adult thing. This is not our it's serious work in a lot of ways. We're interviewing really interesting people sometimes, but we can be a little more lighthearted there. But I've experienced that, Connie. I feel your pain on that one. Do other people have thoughts on that? Not only for podcasting, but in any of this, really. I'm sure you've
like, I
experienced.
feel the only way I could successfully even take it to leadership would be to make it about social justice,
Yeah.
which seems like it's going to be just heavy all the time.
Yeah, we try to balance. I always say to the sisters, like, well, so we'll meet to plan what our next season's gonna be. And I mean, I already have episodes in the can for the fall because if not, we just would never get anywhere. And I'll look and say, okay, we have some great social justice stuff here, but we also need whiter people. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Who has a book coming out that might want to talk to us? We've done artists, we've tried to find ways to balance so it's not just all so happy all the time. The balance is really important to us too. Yeah, Kenneth.
Connie, if I could just say, you may want to bring not just social justice to the table as sort of a thing to focus on, but I think especially young people these days are seeking. There's a renewed interest in spirituality, and
Agreed.
I think if you start to introduce more topics that are in the spiritual frame, I think there's a lot of people seeking meaning in their life and seeking ways of doing good, which kind of crosses into social justice. But I think spirituality is a nice complement to the social justice aspect of this and also allows you to maybe lighten it a little bit. But as far as laughing on a podcast, boy, that's a very attractive thing. What do they say? You can attract more flies with honey than vinegar. I don't know if any of you are fans of The Chosen, but that's like my favorite thing. And one of the things I find so appealing about the character of Jesus is he actually laughs and jokes from time to time, and it draws you in. And I think, laughter isn't slapstick comedy. Nobody's going to get a pie in the face on your podcast. It's just, wit
Joy.
or cleverness, joy. Yeah, there's a lot of different things that can make you smile and laugh, and that's a very appealing thing. I will say also, I just wanted to mention, Jennifer, you were asking about how to grow your audience. Interestingly, just yesterday, I was listening to Ted Danson's podcast called Where Everybody Knows Your Name. And he had somebody on, and he mentioned that if you want to grow your audience for your podcast, go on somebody else's podcast, be a guest on someone else's
Yeah.
podcast. And he had, I think Maria Sharapova was his guest, and she has a podcast of her own called Pretty Tough. And so that may be a suggestion is find somebody else. There's people right here in front of you who have podcasts that are sort of in the same general space you're looking to do. And maybe we could start becoming guests on each other's podcasts to talk about our congregations and what we do and our podcast and what we talk about and whatever. But that's just a thought. When you asked the question, that just popped into my head from yesterday. So
That's a great point, Kenneth. Absolutely. If you can be on other people's podcasts or get people on your podcast who have their own, that's huge. That's great.
There is another question in the chat from Patty asking if you would clarify about Zoom recording.
Absolutely. So yeah, I see Patty. So you have to set it up. I'm pretty sure I have to think through, but you set it up ahead of time so it'll do this for you, and then you just have to download them as individual. When you go into Zoom, I don't know if you've downloaded a lot in Zoom, but it'll download the main file, and then it'll show you that you have the individuals, and you just download each of those
Perfect.
individually.
Okay.
But it
Perfect.
is a setup in Zoom ahead of time.
Okay, great. Thank you.
I was joking with Lori before everybody else got on that I use the podcast Zoom for everything. I just have it automatically set up to record. So I'll get on a meeting. I'm like, sorry, I have to turn recording off because I set my things and I keep them so I don't lose them. You know. So good question though. And let's check out if there's any other questions in here. A couple more links. Yeah, thank you for that, Lori. All right, other things, other questions. Anything I missed in the chat? I don't think so, but I could have.
Maybe Elizabeth, just knowing the frequency of your podcast itself, but then what is your kind of frequency and your scheduling for all the other ways that you're kind of promoting? Like,
Oh,
are you
sure.
posting on Instagram 3 times a week?
Right. So I schedule out. I say, all right, Monday is my podcast day. And I make sure because our episodes drop on Tuesdays. So once the episode's sort of mostly complete, Monday I, do a final listen through, pull out quotes I might want, make sure all of my creation is done for those 3 posts and schedule them all out so that I'm not worrying about that throughout the week. So normally I do a lot of my personally about a day I take, to say, here's all the promotional stuff that I need to prep to move forward through that 2 week period of time. Typically, that can change because sometimes the guest might share something, right, and will want to reshare it. So obviously I'm always watching, but I try to prep the day before the episode goes live to make sure I have all the pieces parts I need while I'm still in it, so I don't have to go back and find a quote or find a piece of what someone's saying that I want to share.
Thank you.
Yeah. Anybody else? We have a few more minutes I could share. I didn't know how many people would come with questions. So I have just some really general things I could share with you in case that's helpful. And I know Lori shared some of my links, which just some other places that you can find that you can find information you might want, communities. There are great podcast communities out there that you could talk to. I think we shared one of those links as well. Let's talk about this. But just, have fun with it. Ask for what you need when you're recording. Try different things if the plan doesn't work out. Consider that your audiences have different needs. We talked a lot about that, but I tell the sisters all the time, I love that you love the podcast, but you're not my audience. So if there's something you don't love, all right, let's talk about it. But if my audience loves it, that doesn't mean we're going to change what we're doing because you maybe don't like the laughing, for example, is a great example. You know, transcribing audio helps. You're gonna listen to these people talk a million times, including yourself. That's the hardest thing for me is hearing myself on these recordings. But just, the biggest advice someone gave us when we started was that perfection isn't real. Like, don't overthink it. You just have to do it because if you overthink it too much, you're never gonna get there. Like I said, our first season, I listen back now and I'm like, oh gosh, I'm so much better at this now. But if we hadn't done it, we wouldn't have learned. We wouldn't have gotten better. So I think those are just really important, just little reminders for people. What else? Oh, promoting audience, medium, budget resources. We talked about all of that. Oh, this was a question. I'm not sure I mentioned all of this. But also you can ask your network to share, right? We have guests, so I always ask guests if they're willing to share on their platforms. We repurpose the joint episode thing we talked about. But yeah, there are a lot of ways to get your podcast out there. Yeah, this was just my little, if no one has questions, I can like riff on stuff for a little while, but I think we actually covered most of that. So yeah, we have a couple more minutes. Anything else? Or if not, we can let you go early. Yeah, Kenneth.
I just have one last thought I'd like to share. The congregation I work for, the average age is about 85.
Mhm.
And so in our congregation, the sisters are looking for things they can do they can contribute. And at that age, there are things they can't do anymore that they used to do for many years. But what they do have is a lifetime of experience and insights and things that are so valuable to so many. I listen to these episodes and I get choked up all the time. The conversations are absolutely beautiful, And, even an elderly person can sit at a table and have a beautiful conversation, sharing memories or insights or things like that. And they feel great about it when they're done. And we had one sister in particular. She's only done one episode with us, but like a week after we put it out there, this lady ran up to her in a grocery store and was like, Sister Mary Catherine, I heard you on your podcast. And it was a former student of hers, and she hadn't seen her in decades and decades. And she was so excited to see her. Sister Mary Catherine said, I was so shocked. I felt like I was a celebrity, standing there in the soap supermarket line. And people hear this stuff. This stuff travels. And I guarantee you that person called some friends of theirs from school and said, oh, the sisters have a podcast now. And da 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 da, and it spreads. And the sisters really enjoy it. And I think when you reach that age in life and you're looking for things to do to feel valuable and that you're making an impact and you're contributing something, we tend to look at this thing through one end of the telescope in terms of finding new listeners. But the sisters who participate in these things, I think, really get a lot out of it, and it's gratifying to them, and they enjoy listening to each other as well. So, anyways, I just wanted to make that maybe odd point.
That's lovely, Kenneth. Thank you. All right, so just a few things before we end. A reminder to sign up for the 2026 conference in Baltimore. That's October 13th to the 16th. And also to join us for our next program, August 18th, which is on music and image licensing, which will be Donna and Arlene with Trissa Marchard, who's the artistic and intellectual property manager for MODA through the Ministry of the Arts, through the congregation as well. So join us for that. And thank you all so much for being here. I hope this was helpful. If you ever have any questions, feel free to reach out. And we'll see y'all next time. So thank you.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thank
You did
you.
a really great job.
Thank you. It was great. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Wonderful, wonderful. Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank y'all.